You're mine tonight, Sienna. I chose you.
Then why is your hand on her waist, Nathan?
Don't make a scene. Not here.
A scene? You're making me a joke!
The air in the Grand Palace Hall was thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and anticipation. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto the polished marble floor where hundreds of the kingdom's elite swirled in a kaleidoscope of silk and jewels. This was the ceremonial Moon Gala, an event held once every 3 years where the royal family announced their chosen mates, forging alliances and shaping the future of the Blackwood Pack. Tonight, however, the air felt different. It was charged, electric, with a tension that coiled in Sienna Ashford's stomach. At 26, she was one of the most capable warriors in the Royal Guard, her skills with a blade legendary. Yet, in this glittering crowd, she was an outcast, the wolfless warrior, an anomaly, a defect. Her simple, midnight blue gown felt like a whisper against the roaring opulence around her. It had been a gift from him, from Prince Nathan Blackwood. For 3 years, he had been her secret, her promise. He'd sworn that her lack of a wolf didn't matter. He'd whispered that tonight. He would defy the council, defy tradition, and claim her in front of everyone. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of hope and fear. She watched him now, a golden prince in the center of the dance floor. He was breathtakingly handsome, his charm a gravitational force that pulled everyone into his orbit. But he wasn't alone. His hand rested on the slender waist of Isabella Ravencroft. Her laughter, a silver bell, echoed across the hall as Nathan spun her, her blood-red dress flaring like a blooming rose. Isabella was everything Sienna was not: the daughter of a powerful duke, her lineage impeccable, her wolf a magnificent auburn beast known for its strength. A cold dread began to seep into Sienna's bones. This wasn't the dance of a prince being polite. This was intimate, possessive. The way his thumb stroked the curve of Isabella's waist sent a shard of ice through Sienna's heart. This had gone on long enough. Gathering every ounce of her courage, she navigated the sea of dancing couples, her path a straight, determined line toward him. The whispers followed her like shadows. The little wolfless guard, what is she thinking? She ignored them. Her world had narrowed to one man. She reached them just as the music swelled to a crescendo. Nathan. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the melody. He turned, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second when he saw her. Isabella's eyes, the color of emeralds, flickered with triumphant disdain. That's when the words, torn from a place of desperation and betrayal, spilled from her lips, the words that would change everything. "You're mine tonight. Sienna, I chose you." The memory of his whisper from just last night was a cruel joke. Her gaze dropped to his hand, still firmly planted on Isabella's waist. "Then why is your hand on her waist, Nathan?" His handsome face tightened, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. He leaned in, his voice a low hiss meant only for her. "Don't make a scene. Not here." A scene. He was destroying her world in front of 300 people and telling her not to make a scene. The fragile thread of her composure snapped. The hurt, the humiliation, it all erupted in a wave of raw fury. A scene. Her voice cracked, rising in volume, turning heads. The dancers around them slowed, their curious glances turning into hungry stares. "You're making me a joke!" Nathan flinched, his face paling. He finally dropped his hand from Isabella's waist, but it was too late. The damage was done. The entire hall had fallen silent, the orchestra trailing off into a confused hush. Everyone was watching. He looked at her then, not with love or even regret, but with cold, hard pity. The council would never accept a wolfless queen. "Sienna, I'm sorry, it was a fantasy." He spoke the words as if they were a final verdict, a death sentence for the future she'd foolishly believed in. He was publicly rejecting her. A ripple of cruel laughter spread through the crowd. Isabella stepped forward, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "Did you really think a broken wolf could stand beside a prince?" The words struck Sienna harder than any physical blow. Broken. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful. She wanted to run, to disappear, to let the marble floor swallow her whole. Her world was crumbling, and the entire kingdom was watching. She backed away, stumbling, the laughter and whispers of physical force pushing her out. But just as she turned to flee, a new silence fell over the hall. It was different this time, deeper, heavier. It wasn't the silence of curiosity. It was the silence of absolute, primal fear. Every head, every single pair of eyes, turned toward the twin thrones at the head of the room. King Dominic Blackwood was rising. At 33, Dominic was nothing like his younger brother. Where Nathan was the sun, Dominic was the storm. He had ruled for 5 years, ever since the tragic death of their parents, and he ruled with an iron fist and a chillingly quiet demeanor. He was larger than Nathan, his shoulders broader, his presence an oppressive weight in any room he entered. His black hair was a stark contrast to his pale, emotionless face, and his eyes. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, holding a depth of power that made even the oldest council members tremble. He stood, his black ceremonial attire making him look like a creature carved from shadow and authority. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. When he spoke, his words were quiet, yet they boomed through the cavernous hall, silencing every heartbeat. "If my brother is fool enough to discard you, then I'll claim you myself." The collective gasp of 300 people was a physical thing, a sudden theft of air from the room. Nathan's jaw dropped, his face a mask of utter disbelief. Isabella's smug smile vanished, replaced by a ghastly, chalk-white shock. The council elders were in an uproar, their whispers now frantic and panicked. King Dominic descended the dais, his steps slow, deliberate, and utterly menacing. Each footfall on the marble echoed like a drumbeat of doom. He walked past his stunned brother, past the petrified Isabella, and stopped directly in front of Sienna. The entire world seemed to fade away. All she could see were his eyes. They weren't cold now. They were blazing with an intensity that burned her to the core. He extended a large, scarred hand to her. It wasn't a request. It was a command, a declaration. "You'll be my queen," he stated, his voice a low, possessive rumble that vibrated through her soul. "The ceremony will be in 3 days." Sienna's mind was a maelstrom of confusion and shock. Her tears had frozen on her cheeks. Her heart, which had been shattering moments ago, was now pounding with a different, terrifying rhythm. Numbly, as if in a dream, she placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, and overwhelmingly solid. It was an anchor in her collapsing world. As he held her hand, his gaze never leaving hers, his eyes flashed with an emotion she couldn't name. It wasn't pity. It was something far more complex. It was a fierce, savage determination, a protectiveness that felt ancient and absolute. For a fleeting second, a memory not her own seemed to surface in his mind. A silent, binding oath echoing through time. "I promised them I'd keep her safe, no matter the cost." The king of the Blackwood pack had just claimed her, and Sienna Ashford's life would never be the same. The Queen's Wing was a world away from the Spartan barracks of the Royal Guard. It was a suite of rooms so vast and opulent it made the Grand Palace Hall seem modest. Silken tapestries depicting ancient werewolf legends adorned the walls. Plush carpets swallowed the sound of her footsteps, and a massive 4-poster bed stood in the center of the bedroom. Draped in velvet the color of spilled wine, the air smelled of dried lavender and lemon oil. It was beautiful. It was breathtaking. And to Sienna, it felt like the most luxurious prison ever constructed. She was now the king's betrothed, a future queen, and yet she had never felt more powerless. She hadn't seen Dominic since he'd led her from the ballroom. his hand a firm, unyielding presence on her back as he'd handed her over to the stern-faced ladies-in-waiting. They had dressed her in a silk nightgown, brushed her hair, and left her in this gilded cage without a single word of explanation. The anger that had been simmering beneath her shock finally boiled over. She was not a damsel in distress to be rescued. She was not a political pawn to be moved across a chessboard. She was a warrior. She stormed out of the bedroom and into the sitting area, her bare feet silent on the cold marble. He was there, standing by the large arched window, staring out at the moonlit gardens. He had shed his formal jacket, and the white shirt he wore was stretched taut across his broad shoulders. He looked less like a king and more like a predator in his natural element. He didn't turn as she approached. "You should be resting." His voice was low, devoid of emotion. "I should be told what the hell is going on," she retorted, her hands balling into fists at her sides. He finally turned to face her. In the dim light, his features were all sharp angles and shadows. "It's simple. You were publicly humiliated. I rectified the situation." "Rectified it? You've thrown my entire life into chaos. Why? Why would you do this? You don't even know me." His gaze was unsettlingly steady. "I know enough." That was it. That was his explanation. The sheer arrogance of it stoked her fury. "You know that I'm wolfless, a broken wolf, the thing my own pack pities and my prince discarded. That's what you've chosen for your queen." "What Nathan did was a betrayal not just to you, but to the crown," he said, his voice dropping even lower, taking on a dangerous edge. "He showed weakness. I showed strength. That is the only thing the council understands." He stepped closer, and Sienna had to fight the instinct to step back. He was immense, a mountain of a man who radiated pure, undiluted power. "So this is just a political move," she said, her voice laced with bitterness. "A way to put your little brother in his place." "This is a political arrangement," he corrected her, his tone leaving no room for argument. He established his rules with cold, clipped precision. "I expect nothing from you beyond appearing at formal events by my side. Your private life remains your own. This wing is yours. You will want for nothing in return. You will be my queen. That is the arrangement." The finality in his tone was like a slap. She was a possession, a symbol, not a person. The hurt was so sharp, so sudden, it took her breath away. "I see," she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. "I'm a chess piece." He watched her for a long moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his winter gray eyes. "I won't discuss this further," he said, turning back to the window. The conversation was over. Sienna stood there, trembling with a mixture of rage and despair, before turning and stalking back to the cold, empty bedroom. She fell onto the ridiculously soft bed, a single, furious tear tracing a path down her cheek. She had escaped public ruin only to be trapped in a private one. Later that night, a sound from the sitting room jolted her from a restless sleep. She sat up, her warrior instincts on high alert. Cautiously, she crept to the door and peered through the crack. It was Nathan. He was swaying on his feet, his formal attire disheveled, and the heavy stench of whiskey radiated from him even from a distance. "Sienna," he slurred, looking around the opulent room. "Sienna, I know you're in there. We need to talk." She pushed the door open, her heart a cold, hard stone in her chest. "There's nothing to talk about. Nathan." His face lit up with a desperate, drunken hope. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. It was Isabella's father, the Duke. He pressured me. He stumbled forward, reaching for her. "I love you, Sienna, not her. It's always been you." 3 years of love and devotion curdled into disgust in her stomach. He didn't love her. He loved the idea of her, the docile, grateful, wolfless girl who would have worshipped the ground he walked on. Now that she was claimed by his more powerful brother, his ego was bruised. That's all this was. He wanted what he couldn't have, what his brother now had. "No, you don't," she said, her voice flat and dead. "You just don't like losing." His face crumpled. "That's not true." "Leave, Nathan." A new voice, cold as the grave, cut through the room. Dominic stood in the main doorway, his arms crossed over his massive chest. He hadn't been there a second ago. He moved with an unnerving silence. Nathan froze, his drunken haze evaporating in the face of his brother's chilling presence. "Dominic, I was just talking to Sienna." "You are not welcome in the Queen's wing," Dominic stated simply. The words weren't a suggestion. They were a law of nature. "She is under my protection now. Leave, brother." The way he said brother was an insult, a dismissal. Nathan's face flushed with a mixture of shame and anger. He shot Sienna one last pleading look before turning and practically fleeing the room. The silence he left behind was heavy and awkward. Sienna stood by the bedroom door, clutching her silk robe, suddenly very aware of how exposed she felt. Dominic's gaze fell upon her, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his icy armor. She saw weariness. "You don't have to pretend to care," she said quietly, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. He didn't move from the doorway, a sentinel guarding her gilded cage. His voice, when he spoke, was a quiet rumble that seemed to come from deep within his chest. "I'm not pretending." He offered no further explanation. He just stood there for another long moment, his gaze a physical weight on her skin, before he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and disappeared as silently as he had arrived. Sienna was left alone once more, her heart racing. "I'm not pretending." The words echoed in the cavernous room, a confusing, unsettling counterpoint to his cold demeanor. Her eyes drifted around the sitting room, landing on a large, dust-sheeted object in the corner, curiosity overriding her emotional turmoil. She walked over and pulled at the corner of the sheet. It was a large, oil-painted portrait. The canvas was old, the colors slightly faded, but the image was striking. It was of a young woman with wild, dark hair so similar to her own, and fierce, intelligent eyes. She stood in a forest clearing, her posture proud and defiant. There was something about her, an air of untamed power, that felt strangely familiar, like a half-remembered dream. Just as she was about to pull the sheet off entirely, 2 guards appeared in the doorway. "Your Majesty," one said, his head bowed. "The king has ordered this to be moved to storage." Before she could protest, they had covered the portrait again and were carrying it out of the room. They worked with an efficiency that was clearly meant to prevent her from getting a closer look. As she returned to her lonely bed, a new unease settled over her. The king's cryptic words, the strange familiarity of the woman in the portrait. It felt like she was standing on the edge of a secret, a deep and dark truth that was being deliberately hidden from her. That night, her sleep was plagued by nightmares, not of Nathan's rejection or the crowd's laughter, but of something older, more primal. She dreamt of a raging battle under a silver moon, of the scent of blood and pine, the sound of snarling wolves, and through the chaos, a woman's voice, a desperate whisper that seemed to call to her across the ages. "Find the truth, daughter of shadows." The 3 days passed in a blur of fittings, protocol lessons, and the oppressive, silent company of her ladies-in-waiting. Sienna felt like a doll being prepared for display. The wedding ceremony itself was a grand, impersonal affair held in the Great Sept, a cavernous stone hall that smelled of old incense and melting wax. It was not a celebration of love, it was an exercise in duty. Sienna walked down the aisle on the arm of the Royal Guard's commander, her face a neutral mask she had perfected over years of enduring insults. She wore a gown of silver thread that felt as heavy as armor. The eyes of the kingdom were on her, and she could feel their judgment like a physical weight. The council members, seated in the front row, looked openly hostile, their faces grim and disapproving. Further back, she saw Nathan and Isabella standing together in the crowd. Nathan's face was a mixture of anger and regret. Isabella's was pure, unadulterated fury. She looked at Sienna as if she wanted to tear her throat out. Dominic was waiting for her at the altar. He was an imposing figure in his black and silver royal regalia, his expression as unreadable as ever. He took her hand, his touch sending a strange, warm tingle up her arm. The High Elder droned on with the ancient rites, his voice echoing in the stone chamber. When the time came for the traditional ceremonial kiss, Sienna braced herself. She expected it to be cold, a brief, passionless press of lips to seal their political contract. But when Dominic's mouth met hers, it was anything but. His lips were firm and surprisingly soft, and the moment they touched, a jolt, sharp and powerful, shot through her entire body. It was like a dormant circuit had suddenly been connected, a surge of raw energy that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. It felt as if something deep inside her, something that had been sleeping for a very long time, had just stirred in response to his touch. He pulled back, his eyes searching hers. For a split second, she saw surprise flicker across his stoic features, a shared acknowledgement that something profound and unexpected had just happened between them. Then, as quickly as it appeared, his mask of indifference was back in place. He turned to face the crowd, presenting her as his queen, and the hall erupted in the polite, forced applause of a pack that had just been forced to accept the unacceptable. That evening, a private dinner was served not in the grand dining hall, but in the intimate setting of her own chambers. The staff had set a small table for two near the large fireplace, the crackling flames casting a warm, flickering glow across the room. Sienna expected the meal to be another tense, silent affair, but after the servants had left them alone, Dominic did something that surprised her. He spoke. "The council believes I have lost my mind," he said, swirling the deep red wine in his goblet. His voice was quiet, stripped of its usual commanding tone. Sienna picked at the roasted pheasant on her plate. "And have you?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a rare and startling sight. "Perhaps. It's a heavy burden. This crown, it isolates you. You spend your days surrounded by people, yet you're utterly alone." He looked up from his wine, his gray eyes meeting hers in the firelight. For the first time, she wasn't looking at a king. She was seeing the man beneath the crown, a man who was intelligent, burdened, and unexpectedly lonely. A man who carried the weight of an entire kingdom on his shoulders. "My father used to say the pack sees the wolf, but never the man inside," he continued, his voice softer now. "They see the alpha king. They don't see the son who watched his parents die." His vulnerability was disarming. It chipped away at the wall of anger and resentment she had built around her heart. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it. The late king and queen had been killed by a band of feral rogues during a diplomatic mission. It was the event that had forced Dominic onto the throne at such a young age. "They made choices," he said, his voice hardening slightly, a shadow passing over his face. Choices they believed were for the good of the pack. Some of those choices had consequences. He seemed to be speaking more to himself than to her. An unspoken story hung in the air between them, thick with secrets. They ate in a more comfortable silence after that, the earlier tension replaced by a fragile, tentative understanding. After the meal, as they stood by the fire, an invisible thread seemed to pull them closer. He was so near she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the clean, sharp scent of pine and winter air that clung to him. He raised his hand, his fingers gently tracing a line along her jaw, his thumb brushing against her lower lip. Her breath hitched. The same electric energy from the kiss at the altar sparked between them, a low hum beneath her skin. His eyes were dark, intense, filled with a raw longing that mirrored the one suddenly awakening inside her. He leaned in, his gaze dropping to her mouth, and she thought she hoped he was going to kiss her again. But then he froze. A war seemed to rage behind his eyes, and with a barely audible sigh, he pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned. The moment was broken. "I should go," he said, his voice rough. He took a step back, putting a safe distance between them. "Good night, my queen." He left her standing by the fire, her skin still tingling from his touch, her heart pounding with a confusing mix of disappointment and intrigue. Later, as the castle settled into a deep, quiet slumber, a soft knock came at her door. Thinking it was Dominic returning, her heart gave a hopeful leap. But when she opened it, she found a woman she had never seen before. She was old, ancient even, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes a startling, pale blue that seemed to hold the wisdom of centuries. She was cloaked in gray and carried a staff of twisted ash wood. It was Elder Meredith, the royal oracle, a recluse who rarely left her sanctuary in the North Tower. "Your Majesty," the old woman rasped, her voice like dry leaves skittering across stone. She entered the room without an invitation, her pale eyes scanning Sienna with an unnerving intensity. "How did you get in here?" Sienna asked, unnerved by the woman's sudden appearance. "There are paths in this castle older than its stones," Meredith said dismissively. "I am not here for pleasantries. I am here to deliver a warning." She hobbled closer, her gaze sharp and penetrating. "The king has disrupted a delicate balance. His actions have hastened an awakening that was meant to lie dormant. The seal is weakening." Sienna stared at her, completely bewildered. "Seal? What are you talking about?" "The magic that binds your true nature is fraying," the oracle hissed, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "When the truth emerges, a choice will be laid before you. You will be torn between the blood of your past and the bond of your future. You must choose vengeance or love. The moon will not grant you both." "I don't understand," Sienna pleaded, her mind reeling. "What truth? Who am I?" But Elder Meredith merely shook her head, a sad, pitying look on her ancient face. "The answers you seek lie buried in blood and shadow. Find them before they find you." And with that cryptic pronouncement, she turned and hobbled out of the room, disappearing into the hallway as silently as she had arrived. Sienna stood frozen, the oracle's strange words echoing in her mind. The seal is weakening. Vengeance or love? It made no sense. Shaken, she walked over to the ornate silver mirror hanging above her vanity. She stared at her own reflection, at the dark hair and the confused, frightened eyes looking back at her. And then she saw it. For a split second, so fast she almost thought she'd imagined it, her reflection flickered, her own brown eyes vanished, and in their place, two orbs of glowing. Liquid silver stared back at her. They shone with an ethereal, ancient light, pulsing with a power that was terrifying and utterly alien. She gasped and stumbled back, her heart seizing in her chest. When she looked again, her eyes were normal, just plain, brown eyes. But the image was burned into her mind. The silver eyes, the sign of the ancient bloodline, the Silver Moon wolves. A bloodline that was supposed to be extinct. The oracle's warning and the terrifying vision in the mirror ignited a fire in Sienna. She was no longer content to be a passive queen in a gilded cage. She needed answers. She started in the royal library, a vast dusty repository of the kingdom's history. For days, she pored over old texts and lineage charts, telling the skeptical librarians she was researching the history of the queens who came before her. As an orphan raised in the pack's communal home, she knew next to nothing about her own origins. Her official file was sparse, parents deceased, no known relatives. But now, she had a clue: Silvermoon. She finally found it, not in the glorious histories of the great packs, but in a grim, leather-bound volume tucked away in a shadowed alcove. The title was Stark Record of Insurrections and Purges. Her blood ran cold as she read. 26 years ago, the Blackwood Pack had carried out what was known as the Silver Moon Massacre. The Silver Moon Pack, an ancient and powerful bloodline, had been deemed a threat to the throne, the official record. Signed by the late King and Queen Blackwood Dominic's parents, declared them dangerous insurrectionists. Their entire bloodline was exterminated in a single, brutal night of fire and claw, an entire lineage, wiped from existence. Sienna's hands trembled as she turned the page. There, under the date of the massacre, was a list of the known dead, and at the bottom, a note. 1 infant child, female, unaccounted for, presumed deceased. The date, it was the exact night she was born. The world tilted on its axis. The pieces began to click into place with horrifying clarity. The nightmares, the oracle's warning, the silver eyes. It couldn't be a coincidence. Her investigation didn't stop there. She became a ghost in the castle, listening at doorways, observing the king and his advisors. One evening, hiding in the shadows of a tapestry near the council chambers, she heard it. It was Dominic's voice, low and strained, speaking to his most trusted advisor, Lord Valerius. The oracle came to see her. Dominic said, "She knows something is wrong. We must do more to reinforce the seal." "Your Majesty," Valerius replied, his voice heavy with concern, "the magic is ancient. Your mother used her own life force to cast it. It was never meant to be permanent. With the mate bond between you now active, it is unraveling faster than we could have ever predicted." "Then we find a way." Dominic's voice was a barely controlled snarl. "I will not let her past destroy her." Sienna didn't need to hear any more. The breath was stolen from her lungs. The seal, the mate bond, her past. He knew. He had known all along. The betrayal was a white-hot knife twisting in her gut. Every moment, every glance, every cryptic word was a lie. He hadn't saved her from humiliation. He had caged her to control a secret. She didn't think. She just acted. She burst from her hiding place and stormed into the council chamber. Both men spun around, their faces etched with shock. "You," she screamed, her voice raw with pain, pointing a trembling finger at Dominic. "You knew. You've been lying to me this whole time." Dominic's face became an impassive mask, but she could see the panic in his eyes. He dismissed Valerius with a sharp nod. They were alone. "Sienna, you don't understand," he began, taking a step toward her. "Don't you dare tell me I don't understand," she shrieked. "The Silver Moon Massacre. That was my family. Wasn't it your parents killed them? And you knew. You've known who I am." He didn't deny it. His silence was a damning confession. "Some truths are dangerous," he said, his voice a low grate of stone on stone. "I was protecting you. Trust me on this." "Trust you," she laughed, a hysterical, broken sound. "How can I trust you when you're hiding who I am from me? You didn't claim me to save my pride. You claimed me to hide your family's dirty secret." She couldn't be in the same room with him for another second. She turned and ran, not to her rooms, but out of the castle, into the cool night air. She needed to breathe, to think. She ran toward the royal hunting grounds, the familiar forest a balm to her frayed nerves. The further she went, the more the adrenaline of her confrontation faded, replaced by a suffocating grief. Her parents, a whole family, slaughtered, and the man she was now bound to was the son of their murderers. A twig snapped behind her. Sienna spun around, her training kicking in. Her hand went to the dagger she always kept strapped to her thigh. 3 massive wolves emerged from the shadows. Their eyes glowed with a feral madness, and the stench of decay and malice rolled off them in waves. Rogues. But they hadn't just stumbled upon her. Their movements were coordinated. They were hunting her. They lunged. Sienna drew her blade, dodging the first attack, the wolf's claws scoring deep gouges in the tree where her head had been moments before. She was a skilled fighter, but she was one human against 3 enraged werewolves. She was outmatched. One of them caught her arm, its teeth sinking into her flesh. She cried out in pain, driving her dagger into its shoulder as it recoiled with a yelp. Another slammed into her from the side, knocking her to the ground. The air rushed from her lungs. The wolf loomed over her, saliva dripping from its bared fangs, its hot breath on her face. This was it. Suddenly, a roar ripped through the forest, a sound so powerful and filled with rage that the very ground seemed to tremble. It was not the sound of a normal wolf. It was the sound of an alpha king pushed to his limit. A blur of pure black fury shot out of the darkness. Dominic, in his wolf form. He was magnificent and terrifying, a beast of shadow and muscle, nearly twice the size of the other wolves. He moved with brutal, lethal efficiency. He slammed into the wolf, pinning Sienna, his jaws closing around its neck with a sickening crunch. He dispatched the second with a swipe of his massive paws, his claws like razors. The third, seeing its packmates destroyed in seconds, turned to flee. But Dominic was faster. He ran it down, his movements a symphony of predatory grace. The forest fell silent, save for the sound of Dominic's heavy panting. He stood over the bodies of the rogues, his black fur stained with blood, his gray eyes blazing with a protective fire. Then Pine... He turned those eyes on her. He patted over, nudging her wounded arm with his wet nose, a low whine rumbling in his chest. Slowly, painfully, he shifted back. He stood before her, completely naked, his body a canvas of muscle and old scars, completely unconcerned with his own state. His only focus was on her. "You're hurt," he said, his voice rough with the aftermath of battle. He gently took her arm, tearing a strip from his own discarded shirt to wrap the wound. His touch was surprisingly tender, a stark contrast to the savage violence she had just witnessed. As he tended to her, his head bowed in concentration, Sienna saw the raw fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for her. He finished tying the bandage and looked up at her, his expression broken and vulnerable. "I can't lose you," he whispered, the words torn from his soul. "Not like I lost them." And in that moment, all the anger, all the betrayal, it all melted away, replaced by the raw, undeniable truth of his terror. He had been terrified of losing her. She didn't know who moved first. All she knew was that her mouth was on his, and he was kissing her back with a desperate, hungry passion that stole her breath. This wasn't a gentle, tentative kiss. It was raw and wild, a clash of teeth and tongues. It was filled with every unspoken emotion that had festered between them, his guilt, her pain, their shared loneliness, and the terrifying, magnetic pull that refused to be denied. He tasted of the forest and the fight, of power and a deep, aching sorrow. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against his bare chest, and she clung to him, a survivor clinging to her rescuer, her enemy, her king, her mate. That night, she didn't run. He led her back to the castle, back to his own chambers, not hers. He didn't leave her side. When the nightmares came, as she knew they would, she wasn't alone. She dreamt of a beautiful woman with eyes of silver, her mother's face finally clear in her mind. The woman was weeping, her voice a siren's call for justice. "They took everything from us. Make them pay." Sienna woke up with a scream lodged in her throat, drenched in a cold sweat. Strong arms immediately wrapped around her, pulling her against a solid, warm chest. "I'm here," Dominic's voice rumbled against her ear. "You're safe. I've got you." She turned in his embrace, burying her face in his neck, and wept, for the parents she never knew, for the life that was stolen from her, and for the impossible man who was the son of her family's killers, yet held her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. He just held her, stroking her hair, murmuring soft words of comfort until her sobs subsided and she fell into a deep, exhausted sleep, safely tangled in his arms. The days that followed were a strange fever dream. Sienna's body felt like it was at war with itself. A low-grade fever left her perpetually flushed. Her senses were heightened to a painful degree. The scent of cooking food was overwhelming. The rustle of a courtier's dress sounded like a thunderclap, and the moonlight felt like a physical touch on her skin, a siren's call that made every nerve ending hum. She was hearing whispers at the edge of her hearing, fragmented voices from her nightmares. Dominic never left her side. He canceled council meetings, postponed diplomatic duties, and remained a constant, grounding presence in their chambers. He saw the changes in her, the escalating symptoms, and the fear in his eyes grew with each passing day. Finally, on the third night, as she lay shivering in his arms despite the roaring fire, he broke. The king's composure shattered, revealing the terrified man beneath. "I can't watch this happen without you knowing the truth," he said, his voice raw with anguish. He sat up, pulling her with him so they were facing each other on the bed. All of it. And so the story came pouring out. Her parents, he explained, were Lyra and Kael, the alpha pair of the Silver Moon Pack. They were the last of an ancient line, wolves who didn't just shift, but who could channel the very energy of the moon, possessing abilities that bordered on magic. They were powerful, charismatic, and they were gaining influence. His parents, King Alistair and Queen Alara, had been manipulated by their advisors led by the ambitious Duke Ravencroft, Isabella's father, into believing the Silver Moons were plotting to overthrow them. Fearing their power, they had made a terrible choice. They'd ordered the purge. "They didn't want to do it," Dominic said, his voice thick with the weight of his family's sins, but they were convinced it was the only way to ensure peace. On the night of the massacre, when his parents' guards stormed the Silver Moon Den, they found Lyra and Kael standing over a newborn baby. Her parents fought to the death to protect her. When the slaughter was over, his mother, Queen Alara, found the infant, miraculously unharmed. "She couldn't do it," Dominic whispered, his eyes filled with a distant pain. "She couldn't kill a child, so she did the only other thing she could think of. She used a forbidden, ancient magic to seal your wolf and the Silver Moon bloodline within you. She bound it to your life force, hoping it would lie dormant forever, protecting you from those who would hunt you for your power." His mother had then spirited Sienna away, leaving her at the Pack orphanage with a fabricated story of being a wolfless orphan found on the Pack's borders. The magic of the seal was so powerful it erased her from the memories of those who had seen her that night. Queen Alara died less than a year later, the forbidden magic having drained her life force. The king followed her soon after, dying of what the Pack called a broken heart. Dominic had discovered the truth 5 years ago, after he became king. When he found his mother's hidden journals, he'd been secretly watching over her, protecting her from the shadows ever since. "Nathan's interest in you, it terrified me. He confessed. He was careless. He drew attention to you. When he chose you for the gala, I knew the secret was in danger. I couldn't let him claim you and then discard you like a toy. It would have made you a target, claiming you myself, making you queen. It was the only way I could give you the ultimate protection. No one would dare touch the king's mate." The truth was a devastating blow. It rewrote her entire existence. Her life hadn't been a tragedy of fate. It had been a carefully constructed lie. The man she was falling for, the man whose touch set her soul on fire, was the son of the people who had murdered her entire family. A new, cold anger replaced her confusion. "You married me out of guilt," she cried, shoving him away. "Was I just a debt you had to pay, a way to clear your family's conscience?" No, his voice was a roar of pure emotion. He grabbed her shoulders, his grip firm but not painful, forcing her to look at him. His gray eyes were shining with unshed tears. "I married you because I couldn't bear to see you hurt again, and because, Sienna, I've been in love with you for 3 years. The confession hung in the air, a shocking, impossible truth. "I watched you from afar," he said, his voice cracking. "I saw you in the training yard, beating warriors twice your size. I saw your kindness to the Omega pups. I saw your strength, your fire, and I watched Nathan take you for granted, treat your love like a trinket. I loved you in silence because I had no right to you. But when he threw you away, I couldn't stand by any longer. Her mind couldn't process it. Love, guilt, lies, truth. It was too much. She pulled away from him, stumbling to her feet. I need space. I need to think. She fled to the balcony, the cold night air a shock to her feverish skin, leaving him kneeling on the bed, his heart laid bare. The full moon hung in the sky like a giant silver eye, its light pouring down on her. It felt different tonight. It wasn't just a gentle call. It was a furious, irresistible command. An agonizing pain suddenly ripped through her. It started in her spine, a searing, white-hot agony. She screamed, collapsing to her knees. It felt like every bone in her body was breaking and resetting itself. The seal, weakened by the mate bond and battered by the truth, was shattering. Dominic was at her side in an instant, his face a mask of terror. Sienna, fight it. But she couldn't. This was not a fight. It was a becoming. Her scream turned into a guttural howl as power, raw and untamed, flooded her veins. It was the power of her ancestors, the magic of the moon, a legacy of rage and strength unleashed after 26 years of imprisonment. Her vision blurred, senses exploding. She could smell the fear on Dominic, the damp earth of the gardens below, the scent of every single living thing within a mile. Her first transformation was agony, but as the pain subsided, it was replaced by a feeling of pure, intoxicating power. She rose, not on 2 feet, but on 4. Where Sienna, the woman, had been, now stood a wolf, but not just any wolf. She was massive, her fur a shimmering, ethereal silver that seemed to glow with its own inner light. And her eyes were the same molten silver she had seen in the mirror. She was an echo of the past, a legend reborn, an ancient alpha. Dominic had shifted too, his massive black wolf standing guard, his expression a mixture of awe and terror. In her wolf form, Sienna felt everything, the grief of her murdered family, the fury of her stolen birthright, and an overwhelming primal desire for vengeance. And the target of that rage was the wolf standing before her, the son of the Blackwoods. She lunged. They crashed together in a storm of fur and fury. They fought with a brutality born of love and hate, of guilt and pain. They tore through the royal chambers, their snarls and growls echoing through the silent castle. This wasn't a fight to the death. It was a violent, desperate conversation between two souls, their wolves saying everything their human selves could not. They fought until their bodies were bruised and bleeding, until their muscles screamed with exhaustion, and they both collapsed onto the ravaged floor, shifting back into their human forms amidst the wreckage. They lay there, naked, gasping for breath, their bodies covered in blood and scratches. The erotic tension in the air was thick enough to taste, a heady cocktail of violence and desire. Dominic crawled toward her, his body aching. He looked into her eyes, his own filled with a deep, soul-crushing acceptance. "If you want to kill me," he panted, his voice hoarse, "I won't stop you. I deserve it. My bloodline owes you that." Tears streamed down Sienna's face, mingling with the blood and sweat. She looked at this man, this king, this killer's son, her mate who was willing to die for his parents' sins. And she knew what the oracle meant, vengeance or love. And in her heart, there was no longer a choice. "I don't want revenge," she sobbed, her voice breaking. I want you to have fought for me because you love me, not because you owe me a debt." His expression softened, the pain in his eyes overwhelming. "I did," he whispered, his voice raw with sincerity. "I do. Every choice I made, right or wrong, it was always for you." That was all she needed to hear. She surged forward, crashing her lips against his. The kiss was a culmination of everything: the pain, the rage, the lies, the love. It was a surrender, a claiming. He rolled her onto her back, his body covering hers, a perfect, possessive weight. "You are my queen," he growled against her skin, his voice thick with lust and devotion. "My mate. Mine." "Yours," she breathed, arching into him. What happened next was not gentle. It was desperate, raw, and primal. It was the physical manifestation of their mate bond finally, fully activating. It was a healing and a breaking, a storm of passion that washed away the sins of the past and forged a new, unbreakable future in its wake as he finally claimed her, filling the empty, broken parts of her soul. She felt it a sense of rightness, of coming home. For the first time in her entire life, she felt complete. The morning sun streamed through the shattered balcony doors, illuminating the wreckage of their chambers and the two figures tangled in the sheets of the bed. Sienna woke to the feeling of Dominic's steady heartbeat against her back, his arm thrown possessively over her waist. The memories of the night before the truth, the transformation, the fight, the fierce claiming were not a dream. They were a part of her now. She was a silver moon, she was the queen, and she was Dominic's mate. They were united, their bond a palpable, living thing between them. But they both knew the peace was temporary. The rogues who attacked her in the forest were not a random encounter. Someone had sent them. Someone knew her secret. While the palace staff discreetly repaired the royal chambers, Dominic and Sienna began their own investigation, with Dominic's knowledge of his parents' reign and Sienna's newfound instincts. They re-examined the old records, looking for the one person who had the most to gain from the Silver Moon massacre. The answer was chillingly clear: Duke Ravencroft, Isabella's father. The Duke had been King Alistair's closest advisor, according to Queen Alara's journals. He was the one who first brought whispers of a Silver Moon insurrection, the one who presented falsified evidence of their treason. The late king and queen, trusting their friend, had been masterfully manipulated. The Duke hadn't feared the Silver Moons because they were traitors. He feared them because their unique connection to the moon's energy gave them the ability to sense deep-seated deception. They would have exposed his own treasonous activities, illegal trade deals, assassination plots, siphoning pack funds. He'd used the Blackwood crown to eliminate the only threat to his shadow empire. And now, with a surviving Silver Moon on the throne, his entire world was in jeopardy. His plan became terrifyingly obvious: kill Sienna before she could master her powers, frame Dominic for the death of his unstable, wolfless queen, and install his puppet, Prince Nathan, on the throne by marrying him to Isabella. The rejection at the gala had been the first move in his deadly game. "Nathan," Sienna said, her heart sinking. "We have to talk to him." They found him in the palace armory, sullenly practicing with a training sword. When he saw them enter together, his hand on the small of her back, his jaw tightened. Dominic didn't waste time with pleasantries. He laid out everything: the Duke's manipulation of their parents, the truth of Sienna's bloodline, and the Duke's current plot. Nathan's face went from disbelief to dawning horror as he listened. "The Duke, he came to me months ago. He admitted, his voice barely a whisper. He said you were a weak king, that the pack was suffering under your cold rule. He promised me the support of the council if I took Isabella as my mate." And rejecting Sienna was part of the plan. Dominic finished, his voice like ice. Nathan couldn't meet their eyes, his gaze fixed on the floor in shame. "Yes, it was meant to show the council I was willing to make the hard choice for the good of the pack, to show I was a worthy successor." He finally looked at Sienna, his eyes filled with a genuine, soul-deep remorse. "Sienna, I swear, I never knew. I never would have. I've been such a fool." The arrogant prince was gone, replaced by a humbled, broken man who finally understood the scope of his own selfishness. "The Duke is planning to make his move soon," Sienna said, her voice firm. "He knows my power is growing. Will you help us, Nathan?" A new resolve hardened his features. He used me. He used my family's tragedy to advance his own greed. "Yes," he said, his grip tightening on his sword. "I'll help." Their chance came 2 days later, during a formal council meeting. The Duke, arrogant and unsuspecting, was arguing for increased military presence on the southern border, a thinly veiled attempt to move his loyal soldiers closer to the capital. In the middle of his speech, Dominic stood. "Your concerns are noted. Duke Ravencroft. However, we have a more pressing matter of treason to discuss." The Duke's face paled. At that exact moment, the great doors of the council chamber burst open, but it wasn't the royal guard. It was a dozen men in black armor, hired assassins loyal to the Duke. Panic erupted. The council members scrambled for cover, but the royal guard, forewarned by Nathan, were already moving, engaging the assassins. Duke Ravencroft drew a hidden blade, his eyes wild with desperation. "You will not take me," he snarled, lunging not at Dominic, but at Sienna. She was the root of the problem. He never reached her. In a blur of motion, both Sienna and Dominic shifted. The chamber was suddenly filled with the terrifying presence of a massive black wolf and an even more awe-inspiring silver one. The assassins froze, their mortal courage failing them in the face of two alphas in their full glory, working in perfect, deadly sync. Dominic and Sienna tore through their ranks, but Sienna's power was more than just tooth and claw. As she let out a piercing, ethereal howl, an incredible thing happened. The wolves of the royal guard, even those fighting in human form, felt a command resonate deep in their souls. A call from an ancient, higher authority. Their movements became more precise, their attacks more devastating, as they followed the silent commands of their new Alpha Queen. Amidst the chaos, Isabella, who had slipped into the chamber, saw her chance. Her face twisted with jealousy and rage. She picked up a fallen assassin's silver dagger and charged at Sienna's exposed flank. "You stole everything from me," she screamed. "Sienna, look out," Nathan yelled. He threw himself in the path of the dagger. It plunged deep into his shoulder, and he cried out, collapsing to the ground. Isabella stared in horror at what she had done, the dagger falling from her trembling hand. Enraged by the attack on his brother, Dominic's wolf cornered the Duke, pinning him to the floor with a paw the size of a dinner plate. His teeth bared inches from the man's throat. The fight was over. The surviving assassins surrendered. Duke Ravencroft was arrested, his treason exposed in front of the entire council. As the chaos subsided, one of the oldest council members, an elder who had been a boy when the Silvermoons were destroyed, stepped forward. He looked at Sienna's glowing silver form with tears in his eyes. "We were fools," he said, his voice trembling with emotion for all to hear. The old stories were true. The Silvermoon bloodline was never a threat. They were the protectors of the balance, the sworn enemies of corruption. It was the Ravencroft line who were the traitors, a rot in this pack for generations. We let him convince us to destroy our own guardians. He bowed his head low, not to Dominic, but to Sienna. "Welcome home, Alpha Queen." A week later, a second grand ceremony was held in the Great Septii. This one was not cold or clinical. It was a true coronation. The air buzzed with genuine excitement and reverence. The pack, having learned the full truth of the Duke's treachery and witnessed Sienna's incredible power, now looked upon her with awe and fierce loyalty. Sienna stood beside Dominic, not as a political pawn, but as his equal. She wore robes of deep silver and midnight blue, the colors of her bloodline and his, intertwined. The crown they placed on her head felt not like a burden, but a birthright. In the crowd, she saw Isabella. After her father's arrest, she had been brought before the king and queen. Instead of demanding punishment, Sienna had offered her mercy. Now, Isabella stood with her head held high, and when her eyes met Sienna's, she gave a slow, respectful nod before turning and leaving the court. She was leaving, she'd said, to find herself, to build a life away from her father's tainted legacy. Nathan was there too, his arm in a sling, but his spirit lighter than Sienna had ever seen it. He caught her eye and smiled a genuine, happy smile. He was no longer a rival or a regret. He was family. Later, he would find her in the gardens. "I'm sorry for everything," he'd said, his voice clear and steady. "I was a selfish fool. You deserved better. My brother, he deserves you." But the most important ceremony was not the public one. That night, Dominic led her to the castle's ancient heartwood tree, its silver leaves rustling in the moonlight. It was a sacred place for their ancestors. They stood before the tree, alone, to redo their wedding vows. This time, there was no crowd, no politics, only love. Dominic took her hands, his gray eyes shining with an emotion so deep it made her heart ache. "Sienna Ashford," he began, his voice thick with feeling. "I loved you in secret. When you were a warrior, I could only admire from afar. I'll love you in the light. As the magnificent queen you are, I'll love you until the last star falls from the sky. You are my mate, my heart, my home." Tears welled in Sienna's eyes as she squeezed his hands. "Dominic Blackwood," she said, her voice filled with a love that felt as ancient and powerful as the tree above them. "I was a broken girl, lost in the shadows of who I was meant to be. You saved me when I didn't even know I needed saving. You fought for me, you bled for me, and you showed me the truth. You are not just my king, you are my home." He sealed their new vows with a kiss that was a universe of promises. It was tender and deep, a slow, languid exploration that spoke of forever. He swept her into his arms and carried her back to their chambers. Their lovemaking that night was a stark contrast to the desperate, frantic claiming after her first shift. This was a slow, deliberate worship. It was the tenderness of his lips on her skin, the reverence in his eyes as he looked at her, the way he whispered her name as if it were a prayer. It was a reaffirmation of their bond, a gentle, passionate dance of two souls who had fought through hell to find their heaven in each other. Every touch was filled with love. Every kiss was a promise. Every moment was a celebration of their shared destiny. Lying in his arms afterward, watching the moonlight stream through the window, Sienna felt a strange, new flutter in her stomach. It was a feeling of profound connection, a deep hum that resonated with both her own life force and his. It was the nascent spark of a new life. The mate bond, in its full and perfect union, had created an heir. She placed his large hand on her still flat stomach, a smile spreading across her face. He looked at her, confused for a moment, and then his eyes widened in stunning realization. A look of pure, unadulterated joy transformed his face, chasing away the last shadows of the lonely king he once was. He buried his face in her neck, his body shaking with silent, happy sobs. The Alpha King, who had shouldered the burden of his kingdom alone for so long, was going to be a father. 1 year later, the Grand Palace Hall was once again filled with music and glittering nobles for the ceremonial moon gala. But this year, everything was different. Hope and prosperity were palpable in the air. The Blackwood Kingdom was thriving under the rule of its king and its silver moon queen. Sienna sat on her throne, a contented smile on her face, with Dominic's hand resting warmly on hers. In the royal nursery, 2 cribs held their greatest treasures: a son, Cale, who had inherited his father's raven black fur and serious gray eyes, and a daughter, Lyra, whose coat was the shimmering silver of her mother's line, her eyes bright with a mischievous spark. Across the room, Nathan was dancing with a fierce, red-headed warrior from a neighboring pack. He looked genuinely happy, his laughter free and unburdened. He had found a love built on respect and equality, and had become his brother's most trusted commander. Isabella had even returned, not as a rival, but as a valued ambassador and a surprisingly loyal friend to the Queen. Sienna's gaze scanned the crowd, her heart full. Then she saw it. A scene that was a painful echo of her own past. A young, wolfless girl, an orphan in the royal training program, stood alone in a corner, her head down as a group of arrogant nobles' sons whispered and pointed, their laughter cruel. The old Sienna would have burned with helpless rage. The queen, however, acted. She stood. An immediate silence fell over the hall as all eyes turned to her. Dominic watched her, his expression filled with pride and love. Sienna descended from the dais, her silver gown flowing around her. She walked directly to the young girl, ignoring the snickering boys. She knelt, bringing herself to eye level with the child. "What is your name?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. "Alara, Your Majesty," the girl whispered, terrified. Sienna smiled. "That's a beautiful name, a queen's name." She glanced over her shoulder at the stunned boys, her silver eyes flashing with a power that made them shrink back. Then she turned back to the girl. "In this kingdom," she announced, her voice ringing with authority through the silent hall, "strength isn't measured by the wolf you have. It's measured by the heart you show." She stood and offered her hand to the girl. "I am creating a new division of the Royal Guard for warriors who excel in strategy and skill, regardless of their form. I would be honored if you would be its first trainee." The girl's eyes widened, filling with tears of disbelief and gratitude. She took the queen's hand, and the hall erupted in thunderous, genuine applause. Sienna had not just saved one girl from humiliation. She had broken the cycle of judgment and pain that had haunted her own life. Later that night, Sienna and Dominic stood in the quiet of their chambers, watching their twins sleep in the moonlight. The silver fur of their daughter and the black fur of their son were a perfect, peaceful harmony. "Do you ever regret it?" Dominic asked quietly, his arms wrapping around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. Everything that happened, the pain, the lies. Sienna leaned back against his solid chest, placing her hands over his. She thought of the lonely, broken girl she used to be. She thought of the rejection that had felt like the end of the world, but had really been the beginning. "Never," she whispered, turning her head to kiss him. "Pain led me to you, and you led me to myself." He kissed her back, a deep, loving kiss under the watchful eye of the moon that had defined both of their destinies. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was something far more real, forged in betrayal and tempered by truth. Some love stories begin with a crown. Ours began with a promise to turn pain into power and duty into destiny.